Before he was remembered as a hero, before songs were written about his strength, there was a child born, carrying a weight no one ever asked if he could bear. Hercules entered the world already measured against something impossible, not against other men, but against God. From the moment he could stand, the world expected him to prove himself. Strength was not something he discovered. It was something demanded of him, something others saw long before he understood what it would cost. This is how legends often begin, come soak with power mistaken for purpose. But this story is not about the 12 labors as a list of victory. It is not about monsters slain or feats achieved. It is about what happens when a person is never allowed to be weak. Hercules grew surrounded by admiration he did not yet earn, and expectations he did not choose. Every mistake felt heavier than it should have been. Every emotion, especially grief, fear, and doubt, was treated as something to overcome rather than understand. He was taught to endure, not to heal, and so he learned to carry pain silently, believing that strength meant silence, and heroism meant never asking to rest. The gods watched him with interest. Mortals watched him with awe. Very few ever truly saw him, because beneath the legend forming around his name, there was a man who did not know how to forgive himself. This is the Hercules we will walk with tonight, not the invincible warrior, but the man who paid for his strength with loneliness, guilt, and endless trial, meant to erase mistakes that could never truly be undone. If you enjoy stories told slowly, stories that explore the quiet cost behind greatness, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe to Sleevore so more gentle retellings can meet you here. When the night grows still, there is nothing you need to prove right now. Let the day loosen its grip. Let the idea of strength soften into something kinder, because sometimes the bravest journey is not the one that defeats monsters, but the one that learns how to live after the battles are over. And when you're ready, we will begin where Hercules truly started, not with a triumph, but with a mistake that changed the course of his life forever. And before the world learned to call him Hercules, he was simply a child growing inside a story he did not choose. His birth was never quiet. Even as an infant, he carried the tension of divine blood, something ancient and restless moving beneath fragile skin. Zeus had given him strength as inheritance, not as gift, and like all inheritances, it arrived without instruction. Hercules did not wake each day wanting to be extraordinary. He wanted, like any child, to belong. But belonging was difficult when everyone around him looked not at who he was, but at what he might become. They measured him early. They praised him loudly. They forgave him rarely. Strength revealed itself in him before wisdom had time to form. He broke things without meaning to. He frightened others without intending harm. Each accident became lesson. Each lesson became warning. control yourself. Be careful. You are different. Difference, when named too often, becomes isolation. His mother loved him fiercely, but even her love carried fear. She saw the gods watching. She felt the weight of expectations pressing against her child's future. Love in her hands became protection, wrapped in caution. Hercules learned quickly that tenderness made others uneasy. When he laughed too loudly, they flinched. When he cried too freely, they grew silent. When he stood still, they waited for something to break. So he learned to quiet himself. As he grew, strength settled into his body like a second skeleton, heavy, unavoidable. Others trained with effort. Hercules trained with restraint. He learned not how to strike, but how to hold back, how to exist without causing damage. This constant restraint shaped him more than any weapon. Yet no one taught him what to do with his emotions. Anger came to him as confusion rather than fire. Grief arrived without language. Fear disguised itself as frustration. And without guidance, these emotions accumulated, unspoken and unresolved. The gods offered no counsel. Mortals offered no patience. Only silence. Hera watched him from afar, her gaze sharpened by resentment not of his actions, but of his existence. To her, Hercules was not a child, not even a man. He was a reminder, a wound made visible. She did not strike immediately. She waited. Hercules grew into adulthood, carrying strength like penance. Wherever he went, people asked for help. And he helped. He lifted, defended, fought when asked. Not out of glory, but obligation. He believed his strength must be useful to justify its burden. Each act of service brought him temporary acceptance. Each success raised expectations higher. Rest became unfamiliar. Peace felt undeserved. Then came the moment no legend recounts gently. Madness did not arrive as thunder or possession. It came as distortion. Familiar shapes felt wrong. Voices blurred. Thought collapsed inward. The world lost coherence, and in that collapse, violence followed. When clarity returned, it did not come alone. It came with silence, so absolute it felt louder than any scream. The damage was done. Hercules stood among consequences no strength could reverse. No labor could undo. No god rushed in to soften the truth. He did not rage. He did not plead. He simply broke. For the first time, his strength meant nothing. He wandered then, not as hero, but as man emptied of purpose. Every memory felt heavy. Every breath felt borrowed. He could no longer trust himself, nor forgive what he had become. This was the moment the world truly turned against him, not with hatred, but with fear. Strength, once admired, became something to manage. Hercules became something to contain. And so he sought judgment. not to escape punishment, but to survive himself. The path to atonement did not begin with monsters. It began with surrender. When he knelt before authority, he did not ask for mercy. He asked for structure, for boundaries, for something external to carry the weight he could no longer hold alone. This is where the labors were born, not as tests of power, but as acts of containment. Each task would give his strength direction. Each command would replace chaos with order. Each labor would keep him moving so he would not have to remain still with his guilt. And Hercules accepted, not because he believed redemption was possible, but because endurance was all he had left. As he stepped onto this path, the world called him hero again. But inside, Hercules knew the truth. He was not trying to become great. He was trying to become safe. And the man who began this journey was not chasing glory. He was running from silence that echoed too loudly, with everything he could never undo. After the judgment was given, Hercules did not feel relief. Relief implies lightness, and nothing about his body or mind felt light anymore. The sentence placed upon him, the labors was spoken by others as punishment, but to Hercules it felt closer to containment, a way to keep himself from turning inward, where memory waited without mercy. He did not argue the terms. He did not negotiate. He accepted them the way one accepts a burden already carried. The first days after the decree were the hardest. There was no immediate task to distract him yet, no monster to face, no road to walk, only waiting. Waiting with guilt has a weight all its own. It presses not on the body, but on time itself, making every moment stretch unbearably long. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought no rest. Dreams returned him to moments he could not change, faces blurred by madness sharpened again in memory. He woke often, heart racing, unsure whether his hands were clean. Strength did not help here. For the first time in his life, Hercules understood what it meant to be powerless, not physically, but morally. There was nothing he could lift, break, or conquer that would restore what had been lost. This realization hollowed him. When the first labor was finally named, he felt something close to gratitude, not because it was easy, it was not, but because it gave him movement. Motion, even toward danger, felt safer than stillness. The creature he was sent to face was spoken of as monstrous, invincible, a terror that had resisted many before him. Others focused on its power, its threat, its legend. Hercules focused on one thing only: it must end. He did not approach the task with anger. He approached it with resignation. This was not a fight to prove strength. It was something closer to ritual, an offering of effort in exchange for continued existence. As he walked toward the labor, he felt no excitement, only focus. And beneath that focus, a quiet question he did not allow himself to voice. If I complete this, will the weight lessen? The encounter itself blurred in his memory afterward, not because it lacked intensity, but because his mind refused to savor it. Victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like survival extended by one more breath. When it was done, others celebrated. Hercules did not. He stood alone afterward, hands trembling, not from exhaustion, but from something closer to fear. He had proven again that his strength worked, and that frightened him, because strength had worked before. The second labor came quickly, as if those who commanded him feared what might happen if he were left idle too long. Each task followed the same pattern. Danger presented, effort demanded, outcome observed. But inside Hercules, something subtle was shifting. With each labor completed, the world's response grew louder. Songs, stories, admiration returning cautiously, then eagerly. People wanted to believe in him again. They wanted the comfort of a hero who could fix things. Hercules did not share their relief. Each success reminded him that capability does not equal control, that being able to act does not mean being able to choose rightly. He began to fear not failure, but success, because success fed the myth that strength solved everything. And he knew better now. Between labors, he traveled alone. Companionship felt dangerous. Silence felt safer when shared with distance rather than people. He did not trust himself around those he might care for. Care, after all, had been the thing he lost control of most completely. At night, when the world grew quiet, doubt crept in. Was this truly atonement? Or was it simply distraction? No God answered him. No sign arrived to confirm that forgiveness was possible. Hercules began to suspect that the labors were not meant to cleanse him, but to occupy him indefinitely. A life spent proving usefulness in exchange for tolerance. And yet, he continued. Not because he believed the end would bring peace, but because stopping would force him to confront the truth he avoided, that some wounds cannot be healed through effort alone. As the labors grew more complex, Hercules noticed another change. His strength, once impulsive and overwhelming, began to refine itself. He learned patience, not as virtue, but necessity. Recklessness now carried consequences not just for him, but for those around him. He began to pause before acting. This pause felt unfamiliar, dangerous even. It required awareness, and awareness brought memory. Still, something within him softened, not toward the world, but toward limitation. He learned that restraint could be strength's equal, that choosing not to destroy required as much discipline as destruction itself. This lesson did not absolve him, but it shaped him. By the time the early labors were completed, Hercules was no longer the man who had knelt seeking punishment. He was leaner in spirit, heavier in thought. The world saw a hero returning. Inside, he felt more like a caretaker of his own darkness, learning how to hold it without letting it spill. He did not yet believe he deserved redemption, but for the first time since the silence descended upon his life, he believed something else might be possible. That strength, guided carefully enough, might one day stop being a weapon and become a boundary. And that boundary, imperfect as it was the only thing standing between who he had been and who he was afraid to become again. By the time Hercules reached the middle of his labors, the world had begun to misunderstand him again. They saw a pattern monster confronted, obstacle removed, order restored. From the outside, his journey appeared linear, almost efficient. Strength applied, problem solved, move on. But Hercules felt no such clarity. Each task ended the same way: silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the hollow pause that follows when effort has nowhere left to go. He would stand alone after each labor, surrounded by proof of success, and feel nothing that resembled relief. The absence frightened him more than fear ever had. He began to understand that the labors were not washing anything away. They were revealing something instead, that no amount of action could outrun memory. As the tasks grew more complex, brute force became insufficient. Creatures adapted. Environments resisted. Victory required patience, observation, and, most unsettling of all, restraint. Hercules failed more often now. Not publicly, not in ways others could see, but internally. He hesitated. He misjudged. He acted too quickly or waited too long. Each mistake reminded him that strength was not a constant. It fluctuated with his state of mind. This terrified him, because if strength could waver, then so could control. He began to fear the moments before action more than the action itself. The stillness where choice lived. The breath before movement. In those moments, doubt spoke clearly. What if he miscalculated again? What if he lost himself again? No labor addressed these questions. Between tasks, Hercules found himself increasingly alone. Companions slowed him down. Witnesses made him uneasy. He did not want anyone near enough to see hesitation in his eyes. Isolation became strategy. In solitude, however, thoughts grew louder. He began to see the labors less as punishment and more as displacement. The world had found a way to make use of his strength without asking whether he was healed. So long as he remained useful, his pain could remain unexamined. This realization did not make him angry. It made him tired. Fatigue settled into his bones in a way no wound ever had. Not the exhaustion of battle, but the weariness of repetition. Each labor demanded everything he had, and each completion asked for more. There was no ceremony marking progress, no acknowledgement that he had already given more than most ever would, only continuation. At night, Hercules sometimes imagined what it would mean to stop, to refuse another task, to sit with his guilt until it either consumed him or loosened its grip. But stopping felt dangerous. Movement had become his only proof that he was not the man he had been in that moment of madness. As long as he moved forward, he could pretend there was distance between himself and that memory. So he kept going. Something changed during one labor that did not require violence. The task demanded precision, awareness, the ability to recognize when force would ruin what patience could preserve. Hercules struggled more with this than any creature he had faced. His hands, trained to overpower, had to learn delicacy. He failed repeatedly. But in those failures, something unexpected happened. He began to listen to the environment, to timing, to his own breath. For the first time, strength stepped back and allowed perception to lead. When the task was finally completed, there was no destruction left behind, only quiet. That quiet felt different. It did not echo. Hercules carried this sensation with him afterward, unsure what to call it. It was not peace, but it was closer than anything he had known in years. A sense that effort, when guided carefully, could exist without aftermath. This disturbed the image others held of him. A hero who paused. A hero who chose restraint. A hero who did not always strike first. Some questioned whether he was weakening. Hercules did not answer. He was beginning to understand something no one had taught him. That strength, when left unexamined, becomes dangerous. And that discipline was not the absence of power, but its refinement. Still, the guilt remained. It followed him like a shadow that lengthened when the world grew quiet. No labor erased it. No victory silenced it. He began to suspect that guilt was not meant to disappear. Perhaps it was meant to be carried. This thought unsettled him, but it also grounded him. If guilt was permanent, then the goal was not erasure, but coexistence. Learning how to live without letting it dictate every movement. This was a different kind of work, and no one was assigning it to him. As the next labor approached, Hercules felt something unfamiliar stir within him. Not confidence, not fear, but caution. A growing awareness of his own limits. A recognition that survival required more than endurance. It required understanding. And understanding, unlike strength, could not be forced. It had to be allowed. For the first time since his journey began, Hercules did not step forward believing that effort alone would carry him through. He stepped forward knowing that power, without awareness, would eventually destroy him. This knowledge did not make him weaker. It made him careful. And care, he was beginning to realize, might be the most difficult labor of all. By the time Hercules reached the later labors, the world no longer saw a man in penance. They saw a symbol. Stories traveled faster than he did now. His name arrived before him, shaped and polished by distance. People expected certainty, resolution, strength without hesitation. They wanted the comfort of knowing that whatever stood in his path would fall. Hercules felt the weight of these expectations more heavily than any creature he faced. He no longer feared failure in battle. He feared the moment when others stopped seeing him as human, when strength became the only language allowed to him. The labors no longer felt like tasks imposed from above. They felt like roles he was required to inhabit, and roles, once accepted, are difficult to step out of. As the challenges grew more complex, Hercules found himself confronting not just danger, but consequence. Some tasks required him to destroy what others depended on. Some demanded that he take from places already fragile. For the first time, he questioned whether obedience alone could justify impact. This hesitation was new. Before, obedience had been simple, a command followed by action. Now, action demanded consideration. He began to weigh outcomes, not just success. He asked himself whether completion always meant improvement. These questions did not earn him praise. Those who sent him on his path valued results, not reflection. And yet reflection had become unavoidable. Each labor left marks not only on the land, but on him. His body bore scars, but his mind carried something heavier: awareness. He began to recognize a pattern. The labors were endless, not because redemption was distant, but because the world benefited from his endurance. As long as he remained willing to carry burdens without complaint, there would always be another task waiting. This realization did not fill him with anger. It filled him with clarity. He understood then that atonement, if it was to exist at all, would not be granted externally. No authority could declare him redeemed. No final labor would erase his past. Redemption, if possible, would have to be internal. This understanding changed how he moved through the world. He became slower, more deliberate. He no longer rushed to prove himself. When danger appeared, he assessed it fully before acting. When force was necessary, he used only what was required, nothing more. Some mistook this restraint for hesitation. Hercules did not correct them. There were moments now when he refused a certain path. Not openly, not rebelliously, but quietly. He would adjust a method, delay an action, choose an outcome that preserved rather than destroyed, even if it meant more effort for him. These choices went largely unnoticed, but they mattered to him. In one labor, he was required to retrieve something from a place no one returned from easily. The path was narrow, the margins unforgiving. Any misstep would mean loss. In the past, Hercules would have charged forward, trusting strength to compensate for error. This time he moved slowly. He tested each step. He allowed fear to inform caution rather than override it. When he succeeded, there was no spectacle, only survival. This success felt different from all the others. It did not feed the legend. It fed his understanding. He began to see that his strength was no longer the defining feature of his identity. It was a tool, one among many. patience, discernment, and restraint now shaped his actions more than power ever had. This shift unsettled those who relied on him as a solution, rather than a person, a hero who thinks is harder to command. Hercules sensed this tension, but did not resist it. He had learned that resistance only created new battles. Instead, he accepted the discomfort of being misunderstood. Understanding, he realized, is not owed to those who benefit from your labor. As the labors approached their final stages, Hercules felt a growing distance between who the world thought he was and who he had become. The legend was loud. His inner life was quiet, and he preferred it that way. He spent more time alone, not to escape others, but to remain present with himself. Solitude was no longer avoidance. It was maintenance. In the stillness, he began to forgive himself, not in absolution, but in recognition. He acknowledged the harm he had caused without denying the limits of his control at the time. This did not excuse his actions. It contextualized them. For the first time, Hercules allowed himself to be more than his worst moment. He did not forget it. He did not diminish it. But he no longer allowed it to define the entirety of his being. This was not redemption. It was integration. As the next labor awaited him, Hercules stood at the edge of another threshold. He knew now that even if he completed every task set before him, peace would not arrive suddenly. Peace, if it came at all, would arrive quietly, through accumulated understanding, through chosen restraint, through the courage to remain human, even when the world demanded legend. And so he stepped forward again, not as a weapon, not as a symbol, but as a man who had learned that strength is most dangerous when it is unexamined, and most valuable when it is guided by care. By the fifth part of his journey, Hercules had begun to understand something few heroes ever do: that endurance changes not only the body, but the way the world looks at you, and the way you look back at it. The next labor placed him in a land already exhausted. The soil was thin, overworked by generations who had demanded harvest without rest. Rivers ran shallow, carrying more memory than water. The people there did not greet him with awe. They greeted him with calculation. They had heard of him. They knew what he could do, and they wanted to use it. The task itself was simple in description. Remove a threat that lingered beyond the edge of the settlement, something large enough to frighten, destructive enough to justify intervention. In earlier days, Hercules would have welcomed the clarity. A problem with a shape, a danger with a direction. But when he approached the place, he saw the truth beneath the request. The threat was not a monster in the way legends preferred. It was a creature displaced, driven from its own territory as the land had been stripped bare. It attacked not out of malice, but confusion and hunger. Hercules stood at a distance and watched. He saw fear in the villagers, but also impatience. They wanted resolution without responsibility. They wanted the world corrected without changing how they lived in it. For the first time, Hercules did not act immediately. This pause unsettled everyone, including himself. Strength had always allowed him to skip this moment, to move straight from problem to solution. But now he lingered in the space between. He let the discomfort speak. If he destroyed the creature, the land would not heal. Another threat would come. If he walked away, the people would suffer. The labor demanded an ending, but the situation required a process. Hercules chose a third path. He spent days redirecting water, reinforcing the land where it could recover. He drove the creature away without killing it, pushing it back toward ground where it could survive without conflict. He taught the villagers methods that required patience rather than force. This was not the labor they expected. They were disappointed. Some were angry. There would be no story worth telling here, no dramatic triumph, no single moment of victory. Hercules accepted this quietly. He had begun to understand that not every good outcome produces applause. Some simply reduce harm. Some prevent worse futures rather than creating heroic ones. When he finally left, there were no cheers, only silence, and beneath it, the faint possibility of balance. As he traveled onward, Hercules felt the distance between his myth and his reality widening further. Songs would still be sung of beasts slain and impossible feats accomplished. No one would sing of the labor where nothing spectacular happened. And yet, this labor stayed with him longer than most. It taught him that power, when applied carelessly, creates dependency. But power used with restraint invites others to grow. This lesson unsettled him more deeply than any danger ever had, because it forced him to question the entire structure of heroism he had inherited. What if the world did not need saviors as much as it needed fewer disruptions? What if intervention itself was sometimes the violence? These thoughts followed him into the next challenge, which tested not his strength but his patience. He was required to wait, not for an ambush, not for the right moment to strike, but for time itself to pass. The task involved guarding something fragile, something that could not be rushed, could not be protected by force alone. Any aggressive action would only hasten its destruction. For a man whose life had been defined by action, this was the hardest labor yet. Waiting stripped him of identity. There was no movement to justify his presence, no visible progress, only vigilance, repetition, and uncertainty. He stood through nights where nothing happened, days where nothing changed. And in that stillness, the old voices returned. Memories he had kept at bay resurfaced. Regret, doubt, questions with no clear answers. Without motion to outrun them, he was forced to sit beside them. At first, this felt unbearable. But slowly, something shifted. He noticed details he would once have missed. The way light changed without warning. The sound of life moving quietly when unobserved. He realized how much of existence unfolded without his involvement. The world did not need him every moment. This realization was not diminishing. It was freeing. When the waiting finally ended and the labor was deemed complete, Hercules felt no triumph, only calm. He had not proven anything. He had simply remained. This too was strength. By now, Hercules no longer measured progress by tasks completed. He measured it by the kind of man he was becoming while completing them. He was less reactive, less eager to be seen, more attuned to consequences that extended beyond his immediate presence. And yet the burden had not lifted. If anything, it had grown heavier. Because awareness does not erase obligation, it complicates it. The world still sent him forward, still demanded solutions, still framed his existence as utility. And Hercules continued to walk, not because he believed the labors would save him, but because refusing them would abandon others to systems he understood too well. This was the quiet tragedy of his position. He could see the flaws clearly, but he was too embedded to escape them entirely. As the next labor loomed, Hercules understood that the hardest battles ahead would not be fought with monsters or gods, but with expectations, those placed upon him, and those he placed upon himself. He was no longer trying to be forgiven. He was trying to be responsible. And responsibility, he was learning, is far heavier than guilt, because it does not fade with time, and it cannot be defeated by force. Still, he stepped forward, not because he believed the path would end soon, but because walking it with awareness was the only way he knew how to remain whole. By the time Hercules reached the 6th phase of his journey, the world had begun to feel thinner, not smaller but less solid, as though the boundaries between what was living and what was remembered were slowly dissolving. This labor did not lead him toward a distant land or a visible danger. Instead, it drew him inward, toward places most people avoided, not because they were forbidden, but because they were honest. He was told that the task would require him to descend. As the story comes to rest, there is no need to carry Hercules any further. His journey was never meant to leave you energized or inspired in the usual way. It was meant to settle, to remind you that even the strongest lives are shaped not by victory, but by reflection, restraint, and quiet acceptance. Here on Sleevore, stories are told softly, not to demand attention, but to offer a place where the mind can slow and the weight of the day can loosen its grip. If this story brought you a sense of calm, if it gave you space to breathe more deeply, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll show these quiet journeys can return to you on another night. For now, let the world fade gently into the background. There is nothing left to solve, nothing left to prove. Let your thoughts drift. Let your breathing deepen. Let sleep arrive in its own time. Good night, and may your rest be peaceful.